Now that Utah football is moving forward with Isaac Wilson as their starting quarterback coming off of Cam Rising's season-ending injury, can this Utah team turn it around? They're sitting at 4-2 right now, still got 6 games ahead of them. How's the rest of the season going to play out? And what kind of a challenge do the TCU Horned Frogs present to Utah? That's what we're breaking down on today's Locked On Utes.
You are Locked On Utes, your daily podcast on the Utah Utes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for making Locked On Utes your first listen and view of the day. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network and available wherever you get your podcasts, as well as on YouTube. If this is your first time listening to our show, make sure you like and subscribe. Love interacting with all of you in the YouTube comments, as well as on social media, where you can follow our show at Locked On Utes on X. Today's episode of Locked On Utes is brought to you by Game Time. You can download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege. It's all caps, no spaces, for $20 off your first purchase. My name is JG Wistrcill, former intern inside the University of Utah Athletic Department. Excited to be joined by a friend of the show, Dante Guardi. And on today's show, we're breaking down TCU. Let's continue to talk about just the fallout of Cam Rising. And in fact, we'll even start with that because just the ramifications of that is Utah's now starting true freshman quarterback, Isaac Wilson. But more than just Wilson, I just want to talk about the position this Utah team is in, Dante. And 4-2 is not where we expected this team to be. I think coming into the year, 5-1 was what we thought it would be. We looked at entering the year, their toughest games being against Oklahoma State and Arizona after that, and they were able to beat Oklahoma State, obviously, and we see what the Cowboys look like now. But then you lose back-to-back games to Arizona State, one of those coming off a bye week. And there's issues like the tackling for this team. They have more injuries. We didn't see Karene Reed, Keanu Tanavasa, or Connor O'Toole. That's majorly concerning to this Utah football team that they have been out there, and you're already down your projected starting quarterback. So can Utah turn it around? I believe they can. In terms of, number one, this team is not out of the race for the Big 12 title. I believe they will be 6-2 after their next 2 games, because I do think they're just clearly better than TCU and Houston. Even at the lesser level at times Utah's played at, still better than those 2 teams. They should be 6-2. Utah has a chance to still go to the Big 12 championship game. But if I can update my prediction, I will predict Utah to go 8-4. I think they will split their final 4 games of the season. Some combination of beat BYU, beat UCF, lose to Iowa State and Colorado. Some combination of that is, I feel like, what awaits Utah. I'm not completely jumping off and saying the season is completely over, but I feel like an 8-4 season with a backup quarterback, it's very similar to last season. We're going to struggle to beat the best teams. You'll knock off one, but you'll also lose to teams you shouldn't, like in Arizona State. That's what I feel like awaits Utah, is another 8-4 year.
Yeah, I could totally see something similar. However, I think at this point, it's a little bit unfair to put a label on it in terms of a record. I think we just need to be more focused on on-field production. Like winning and losing, it matters. But at this point, if we're not expecting Utah to win the Big 12, it matters a lot less. And at this point, I'd rather just see Isaac Wilson improve after each week to the point where we feel comfortable about the quarterback situation heading into next season. You mentioned the injuries on defense, and that's something that has serious ramifications for the entire course of the season, because a lot of what Utah's defense is you have a core group of guys who continually get better week in and week out. And by week 7 or 8, they're firing on all cylinders, and not having that sense of continuity that is usually there certainly stunts their growth and stunts their overall production. 8-4, I think, is a very reasonable prediction. I like what you said about the next 2 games, winning those being 6-2. And then going into that BYU game, I mean, that's a big momentum shifting type of game, and if Utah's able to generate some momentum going into that game, get the fans back on their side, if you will, as we should all be on their side no matter what, first and foremost. But obviously there's a little bit of turbulence as of right now, but nonetheless, a couple wins to get back on track, get the wheels in motion, and beat BYU and go from there. I mean, if that would be a massive win, especially given the way BYU's been playing football this season. So a win there would certainly get the momentum back on Utah's side. And I mean, obviously this is more anecdotal and this doesn't mean anything for this season, but you look at when Utah won the Pac-12 in 21, I mean, they lost to BYU and San Diego State back-to-back games, and then just went on an absolute tear. So we've seen Kyle Whittingham coach teams finish the season strong. Like the prediction, the expectations are hard to articulate at this moment because it could go really well or it could end up being 7-5, something along those lines. You never really know. So I feel like I just want to see a progression in the on-field product over the next couple weeks, and then we can kind of go from there. But I will say that I agree with you that Utah will win these next 2 games, and if able to win that BYU game, that's a lot of momentum, and some special things could happen. It could be a very remarkable turnaround.
Utah is very lucky that they still have BYU and Iowa State on their schedule. I think a lot of people would listen to that and be like, what do you mean? Those are really good teams. Head-to-head wins against them. If you beat them head-to-head and those teams have 2 losses, that looks really good for Utah. So that's where I still look at this Utah team. I'm like, okay, they can still do things. And they've already shown more progress this year, even though, yes, you lose Cam Rising and everything. But like then that 2021 team did that, turned it around and won the Pac-12. So that's a big thing too. You mentioned the improvements. Isaac Wilson has improved pretty much each week. Yes, the second half against Arizona was rough, but I do think that was a situation where I looked at the way that the Wildcats defensive backs were playing. Utah got one-dimensional, and I think everyone was able to learn from that. I think Isaac Wilson was, and I think like just Andy Ludwig too. The play calling I think would be better in that situation if Utah had to revisit that with Isaac Wilson in the game. And that's not me saying like, oh, Utah learned from that and that's not an issue again. No. That goes back to what I just said about Utah more than likely finishing 8-4. I just, it's unrealistic right now for me to sit here and predict them to beat their last 4 opponents when they just lost to 2 teams in Arizona and Arizona State who have not shown the consistency level of a BYU and an Iowa State, who are currently undefeated right now. And all the hats off to them for the effort and the work that they'd put in. So this is going to be a very interesting season for Utah because the tackling is a massive issue with this team. They have injuries, but I trust the coaches in place to right the ship in terms of just what we've seen from a Kyle Whittingham led team, right? So that's where I expect this Utah team to have success. I expect them to become more disciplined. I do look at and I see this Utah team, even with Isaac Wilson, I think that they know how to manage Isaac correctly, and Isaac can continue to make plays and make throws. He's going to still turn the ball over, but because he's gotten better, I have a lot of trust and faith into what he's going to do. And I am a believer in this Utah football team still I still think they will be a contender for the Big 12 conference title. I don't know if they'll win it, even if they got in who they were going to face against. That's just really tough to do, but that's where we'll see. But it all starts against TCU. So that's where I want to take this conversation and talk about the Horned Frogs in one moment. But first, today's episode of Locked On Utes is brought to you by our friends at Game Time. Game Time filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. Game Time has a new feature called Game Picks that makes getting tickets faster for your favorite events and even easier. Game Picks curation makes it even easier to save more on sports, concert, comedy, and theater events near you. How about that all-in pricing? A tog line featuring features that shows you the total upfront with no surprise fees at checkouts. You also get a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy. The lowest price guarantee or Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. Game Time also has the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. You can take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Picks. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege. That's capital L for locked, O for on, and C for college, or all of college is capitalized. So L and locked is capitalized, O and on is capitalized, and all of the word college is capitalized for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. All right, Dante, before we jump into TCU, is there anything else you wanted to add based on what I was saying about my belief in still Isaac can be, like I always said with Bryson Barnes last year, Isaac can be part of the reason this team wins. I think if the game falls on Isaac, we've seen how that goes. But I think there's still too much talent on this roster. The Dorian Singers, the Brant Kuithe, the way this offensive line is playing, Mekhi Bernard, I mean, my goodness, to give up on them and be like, yep, this season's completely over.
Yeah, to further the notion I was emphasizing earlier about the 21 team turning it around, you could make a similar argument about the 22 team as well. I mean, they were 4-2 going into that game against USC, and then they won, and then from there it was cake essentially, you know. So we could see a similar turnaround, and Utah's done it twice in the past, and it took one big home win to get the momentum back on Utah's side. It was that USC game, that infamous 43-42 finish when Cam Rising ran it in for a 2-point conversion. Beautiful night that was. Nonetheless, I mean, just kind of furthering that notion I was emphasizing earlier. And like you were saying about Isaac, progression each week. And we've already seen he's done, even when Cam was healthy, Isaac's done a better job of getting Dorian Singer involved.
Yes.
Not to say that Cam was doing a bad job. I mean, obviously it was growing pains, Dorian's first couple of games in a Utah uniform. But when Isaac was playing quarterback, it just felt like there was more of a sense of urgency to get Dorian Singer the ball. And I mean, he's made some tremendous plays. Even last week against Arizona State, he made some catches that were just fantastic. There was that one, I think it was like a 35-yarder on the sideline. He made just a tremendous adjustment to catch that pass.
By Cam? Is that the one you're talking about?
Yeah, that's the one I'm talking about. Yeah, but I mean, that was all Dorian Singer on that play. Made a tremendous adjustment to get around the DB and hauling that catch. So it would be nice to see Brant Kuithe get involved a little bit more. I feel like that's kind of what we're all saying, especially given the expectations for him and what we've seen him do in the past. It was nice to see them running those jet sweeps again. I mean, they've been running that play for 7 years. Like when Brant was young in freshman, sophomore years, 2019, like he had multiple rushing touchdowns that season. So it was nice to see them get a little bit creative with the play calling in that regard. Obviously, we still rightfully have our gripes with the play calling, but Isaac is doing a good job of getting the playmakers the ball, and the coaching staff is drawing up more plays for Brant Kuithe. So I'm not going to say it's going to be a perfect storm this weekend, that everything's going to finally come together and the playmakers are going to make plays, but I think we're heading more towards that direction, and that should be a big point of emphasis for the coaching staff and players alike moving forward.
Yeah, absolutely should be. But there's one, like we both agree, there's a lot of reasons to still be optimistic about what this team can do. And once again, for those of you that are jumping off the bandwagon, you're wrong in 2021. Maybe you'll be right this year, but why jump off so early is all we're saying. So let's take it one game at a time. Because like you said, Dante, earlier, it's too early for predictions. And you're right. That's what it is for Utah. But I like that fight with predictions. So that's why we're still doing it. But this team is focused on going 1-0 this week. And going 1-0 this week means beating TCU, a TCU team that, of course, used to share a conference with Utah. A TCU team that the last time they came out to Rice Eccles Stadium, they put a beat down on Utah. So now we get to see this TCU team this year. They made the national championship game a couple years ago, but they are not that same team that made the national championship because they just lost to one of the worst teams in the Power Four in Houston. So what to expect in TCU? Expect a team that can put up points and do so through the air. Now, I will say, I think Utah's played the Arizona and Arizona State, I think overall have better offenses, but let's just talk about what this TCU team has done. They beat Stanford, their first game of the season, 34-27, then beat an Long Island University. They lost to UCF 35-34, lost to SMU. Let the SMU scored 66 points on them, 66-42. Then they beat Kansas 38-27. Everyone beats Kansas this year. And then the Houston game, they beat Houston beat them 30-19. So when you're talking about TCU, you're talking about a team that relies heavily on Hoover to make plays through the air. They have Betch as a good receiver on the outside. I like some of their options in the passing game. I think they're going to make plays through the air on Utah. They have a massive problem, though. They can't run the ball. They have less rushing yards as a team than Mekhi Bernard does by himself. This is an offensive line that does not do a great job running blocking. They do not have great running backs overall. And that's yes, the Utah run defense took a little bit of a dip, but even Utah's defense is still one of the 41st as a rushing unit. They have a better rush defense, Utah does actually, than Georgia through this point in the season, which I thought was crazy. But if you take away some of the big runs, and thankfully, they don't have to play Scadaboo again this season, so he's not going to be breaking all those insane tackles. And we know this Utah team should be tackling better as well. I expect Utah to make this TCU team one-dimensional, and Hoover has turned the ball over before. On the other side of the ball, TCU's pass defense has actually been pretty good. So if I'm Utah, I'm really prioritizing trying to get the ball to Dorian Singer and Brant Kuithe and making life easy on Isaac. Don't make him have to do things too complicated against his secondary. But TCU's run defense is ranked outside the top 100. This is Mekhi Bernard's day, and let this Utah offensive line eat. This is a favorable matchup for Utah, and I think this team doesn't lose 2 games in a row, but Dante, this loss to this TCU team would just be another level. I can't see Kyle Whittingham's team coming out flat at home and falling to this version of the Horned Frogs.
Yeah, to further your point on making life easy for Isaac Wilson and about Mekhi Bernard, I mean, those were the numbers that stood out to me most. The TCU run defense. The one thing Utah's been consistently good at this season is getting the ball to Mekhi Bernard and letting him do his thing, because he has just been downright fantastic. It says a lot about the offensive line, for the most part, has been pretty sound up front. And yeah, Utah needs to start strong. They need to pound the rock. And if they're able to succeed running the ball early, TCU is going to be loading the box more, which is going to put less DBs on the field and make it easier for Isaac Wilson to throw the ball. So this should be a very favorable matchup for the Utah offense. I think as long as there's no early turnovers and you're not giving TCU favorable field position, this should be a pretty easy go about for the Utah offense. Definitely a favorable matchup, like you said, and certainly not the hostile environment that they were in last weekend, and certainly not a team that has the defensive backs of the University of Arizona, like we saw how they played against Utah. Very aggressive, lanky as well. Just not a very good matchup for a young quarterback. And you got Isaac coming out with a vengeance potentially too. He knows that this team hasn't been playing up to their full potential. So I'm excited to see his body language early on. But then again, he is still young. So you got to hope that he avoids those early mistakes and doesn't get into his head too much. And then when you look at TCU's offense, like you said, they're fantastic throwing the ball. And this is a rematch of Utah versus Cal in the earlier Pac-12 days when you had Sonny Dykes coaching against Kyle Whittingham. And it reminded me of a game. Both teams were 5-0. Utah was 5-0. Cal was 5-0. Game day was in Salt Lake City. And Jared Goff, the first overall draft pick, threw 5 picks against Utah. Utah ended up winning the game. So Kyle Whittingham has done a good job scheming against a Sonny Dykes offense. And it's not like this is unfamiliar foes. You know, Sonny Dykes has always preached the same philosophy when it comes to the X's and O's. Kyle Whittingham's going to know what to deal with. And it might be a little bit tough with a relatively inexperienced secondary still kind of growing, but I don't think TCU has the wide receiver talent to really put a beating on Utah when it comes to throwing the ball. I think Utah wins this game by a couple possessions, maybe a few. I'll say 34-20, something along those lines. I think Utah runs the ball really effectively early on, keeps the ball safe, ends the first quarter up 14-0, 14-3, and doesn't really let TCU get too comfortable. I feel like TCU is always going to be reeling, and Utah is just going to have a pretty favorable matchup on offense because they're going to run the ball well, which is going to make it easier for Isaac. And we did see the play calling get a little bit more creative last week. I know that could have been because Cam Rising was in the game and he's just got a better feel for the offense. But I mean, Isaac still, like, just because he didn't play doesn't mean he didn't go to practice. You know, he was still learning the offense and he was still getting in the groove of the Andy Ludwig offense. So I think we're going to see an expanded playbook relative to what we saw against U of A, against what we saw against Oklahoma State, because you did see the offense stagnate in the second half of those games. And I think it was because the playbook was so limited, which made the second half play calling very predictable for the Arizona defense, for the Oklahoma State defense, because it wasn't like against Arizona in the first half, they were moving the ball poorly. They were able to get the ball down the field. They just weren't able to execute on the later downs, which is, it's unfortunate, but you can't say that they weren't moving the ball well. And you can't say that Isaac didn't show flashes in that first half. He did hit some impressive downfield throws, and he's willing to take a hit. You know, that's another big thing. Early on, you see a lot of true freshman quarterbacks scared in the pocket. Isaac Wilson is certainly not scared to take a hit, and he certainly has the arm talent to make things happen. And this TCU defense is one to make it happen against, you know, and get the wheels back moving, generate some momentum, and hopefully this is the start of a pretty remarkable turnaround.
I think it has the chance to be, at the very least, a big get-right game for Utah. You predicted a Utah win of 14 points. The line in this game by our friends at FanDuel does favor Utah by 4.5. And I just think when you look at the matchups, as we said, this Utah team should run the ball. They should be balanced. And I was talking about, well, you saw Utah do a lot against a Utah State being one of the teams. I think Oklahoma State too, as you saw, they'd run just a lot of like two-man routes or three-man routes, and they leave everyone else to protect. That's something I would like to see them continue to do more of, because I think Isaac will do a good job. I don't want Isaac just chucking it up to Dorian Singer in double coverage. I'd much rather him put in a position where it's Dorian Singer one-on-one, Brant Kuithe one-on-one, and then Isaac can just put in the vicinity and allow those guys to make a play on it, because we've seen when he just sits back there and also he does struggle with pressure just moving around and feeling that, but also when he reads the defense at times, that's where it comes with making interceptions. And he's continued to grow and get better at that. And Andy Ludwig is still, we get frustrated with Andy Ludwig. He's done a lot of good things as the offensive coordinator at the University of Utah. Now that he knows who his quarterback is, now that he knows how to maximize him, I expect this offense to improve. And the fact that they have 3 weeks until they play what I would deem, I'm just going to be real, a good team again. TCU and Houston, they can absolutely come in and beat Utah. They are capable of doing that. But these losses would be another level. Then I do think Arizona State and Arizona both prove they're good teams. Both those teams will be bowl eligible at the end of the season. And both of them are the types of team that can lose and beat anyone. And maybe Utah is that type of team too. That's what they seem like right now. And I'm excited to see this team go out against the Horned Frogs and prove that they can still put themselves in a position to be a contender in this conference. But always still going to be hard to do without Cam Rising. And I'm sure all of us are still processing everything that happened with Cam Rising. So I do want to touch on, now that we are 24 hours removed from the news about Cam Rising, how we're all feeling, just talk about the fallout from it. And we are going to be diving into that in one moment. But first, I want to talk with you all about one of the sponsors of our episode of Locked On Utes today. Today's episode of Locked On Utes is brought to you by FanDuel. Hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. I already mentioned the Utah's line, 4.5. They are favored. The Utes are. This is a Kyle Whittingham team that, yes, did they lose at home? Did they lose back-to-back games? Sure. But when you look at a team like a TCU, and yes, Hoover airs it out a little bit, but there is such a clear mismatch in the trenches here. TCU just lost to Houston. This does not feel like a game that Utah is going to drop. So I'm rolling with the Utes in this one. However you guys are feeling, whether it's in the NFL action, we got lots of great games going on across the association. MLB playoffs are right away, and college football, the sport we all love, is still producing electric games week after week. Either way, you can head over to FanDuel today and get in on their offer. $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com today. All right, Dante, talking about the Cam Rising injury still, it's just so frustrating, and not frustrating even, I'll say, but just such a downer feeling, and I just hate the way it ended. Not just for Cam, but obviously all of us had spent a lot of time getting just really excited to see Cam have the opportunity to come back. Every Utah fan about what this team can do. Just like careers like the one that Cam Rising started at Utah, they're not supposed to end like this. It's not supposed to be these great moments and there's so much success and then just battles injury. Like, that's not how it's supposed to go. And it's just that we're always constant reminder that life is not a fairy tale, because you don't get to see Cam come back and, you know, prove, in this case, he didn't get to prove everyone wrong that he can overcome the injuries. He didn't get to have the chance to lead this Utah team to a Big 12 title in the college football playoff. He didn't get a chance to beat BYU. So that's where it's just still such an icky and awful feeling that this is how Cam Rising's story ends with Utah. And he's one of the best players to ever come through the University of Utah for what he's led them through the heights. And I just still can't believe that this is how it's all going to come to a close. Just still in utter shock and feel so bad for Cam, and can't believe that after all the episodes, you know, titled What Cam Rising Will Do, and all the conversation and all the hype and all the videos, that we stand here over 24 hours removed from the news that he will indeed miss a season.
Yeah, I mean, heartbreaking is the word that encapsulates it, most definitely. And yeah, I mean, hate to be like corny, but don't cry because it's over a smile because it happened. Because I mean, he did take Utah to new heights within the 2 years that he led them to a conference title. Simply put, you know, Utah was that close in 2019 to making the playoff, even if they had beaten Oregon in the Pac-12 championship game. And before that, they made their first conference championship game and scored 3 points in it against UW, you know. And then before that, it was Utah fans constantly complaining about the lackluster quarterback play, the stagnant offense over and over and over again. And Cameron Rising was the first player to get Utah over the hump. I like to say Tyler Huntley was the first player to make Utah's offense fun to watch. In 2018, him and Troy Taylor combined, they dropped 40 points like 4 weeks in a row in October. And I mean, I was like mind blown. You know, Utah football used to be hope they score 30 points and they'll win. And if not, it's like maybe we'll get a defensive touchdown late and something cool will happen, you know. But Cam Rising was the first one to make Utah's offense a consistent threat to really complement the defense. So seeing it end like this it's brutal, man. And especially because it was outside of his control, outside of the coaching staff's control. You can't control injuries. That's what they call it, the ugly part of the game, and rightfully so. I mean, you saw players on the Cowboys crying watching Aiden Hutchinson get carted off on Sunday. That was a gruesome injury, but I mean, that just furthers the notion that it's the worst part of the game of football, and yeah, I mean, it's obviously a bummer, but next man up, we move, I guess, is the only real way to try to move on from it, and hope that Cam could serve as a good mentor to Isaac, because obviously he knows what it takes to win, because he won a lot during his time here.
I'm encouraged to hear that the team had a players only meeting, and even Isaac was someone who spoke up in, and Jonathan Hall had a quote about how, like, we're going to shock the world. That's the mindset this team needs to have. And I still believe they are capable of shocking the Big 12 and making a run to the conference title game. I'm not going to predict that to happen, but they're capable of it. They have the players and the talent in that room. This group came together with the goal to win a Big 12 title. And the truth is, if you're a 2-loss team, you still have a chance to make the title game. So therefore, Utah still has a chance to get it, and they still have a favorable schedule. Yes, they welcome it. The two toughest teams they still play, they welcome into their building, Iowa State and BYU. It's going to be very difficult to win those games, but this is still a Utah team that barely has lost at home, and neither of those teams have quarterbacks who can make the throws to the level Noah Fifita did. So that's something that should give you some confidence. And then you look at Colorado, that quarterback and Shedeur Sanders can make some throws that even better than the ones Noah Fifita made, but the trenches talent there is even more different. UCF's been disappointing. We already mentioned Houston and TCU. This schedule still will give Utah a chance to accomplish their goals, even without Cam Rising, but still sucks that we have to do it without Cam. And that journey starts now without him, and it's something that I still can't believe we won't get to see the conclusion of Cam Rising's career on the field, but he left a legacy on impact on Utah that will never be forgotten. That's going to do it for today's edition of Locked On Utes. Make sure you guys check out Locked On College Football or Locked On Big 12 for your second listen of the day. Locked On Big 12 Squad Show. A lot of fun this week. Even though Utah caught some L's, still a lot of fun to hop on with the squad, so make sure you guys join me there. Be having a crossover tomorrow with Locked On TCU. Talk about Utah's game against TCU. That's going to do it for this show today. Dante, thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me, JT.
That's going to do it for our show. We hope you'll rejoin us tomorrow.